Good morning, dearest friends. Friday, Erev Shabbos, the 11th of Sivan, 10th of June, second to last day of the Tashlumin, the days in the temple times folks would be able to make up for missed offerings during the time of the Beis Hamikdash after Shavuos. There's a machloikas or varying opinions about when one concludes saying Tachnun. The Shulchan Aruch says it's only one day Isur Chag, and I believe the Mishnah Berurah paskins that way as well. The Balatanya, the Shulchan Aruch Harav, extends these days of Tachnun free and continuing celebration until the 12th of Sivan, a full 6 days plus the 1 day of Shavuos. And so we're still in a holy, joyous, Shavuos-oriented zone. As we tease, we're studying the entire Gemara on one page, one line at a time. And we are right now studying Masechet Shabbat, chapter 16. We're on 120b, Kuf Chaf Amud Aleph, and with Hashem's help, we'll be turning on to Kuf Chaf Amud Beis. With Hashem's help, we'll be turning to Kuf Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph. That's 121a. As we teased yesterday, today's discussion is going to touch upon the ever interesting question of if a person has Hashem's name written on their person. Now, truth be told, I teased that a story I shared that when I was doing what's called Merkaz Shlichut. We Chabad sends young yeshiva Beis Medrash age yeshiva students across the globe to communities that don't have Rabbanim or shuls or Chabads to reach out to isolated Jews. Sometimes they'll have a town with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Jews. We can't support ongoing shul, but Chabad will send yeshiva students to make sure that all the people have a contact and they're up to date with and hopefully upgrading their Yiddishkeit. So I was sent to the unexotic place of Burbank, California, where there were actually thousands of Jews. There actually is a Chabad house, and our task was to reach out to the surrounding towns and villages. And Burbank is in a valley, as is a lot of California, is either valleys or mountains. And so Burbank is essentially, if I recall, a valley, and all around you have these mountains with these little villages and towns, and not terribly isolated, but relatively isolated folks. And we once pulled up into some compound somewhere up on a mountain, and we pulled in, and I remember it was gated, and there was some very fierce bulldogs, and a very rugged looking owner comes out, and he sees us, and he'd never met he never met Chabad students there. But the first thing he does, he sees us, is he whips off his shirt, and we see that he has across his chest the words Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. He was Jewish, but relatively or pretty removed from Yiddishkeit, and he told his tattoo person that he's a Yid, and he wants to honor his heritage. Give me something that's really central to Judaism. And this Jew, in his beautiful intention, although unfortunate, a very unfortunate, tattoos himself with the words Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Of course, if you do a little more research, you would know that the Hashem that we're celebrating in the Shema has a mitzvah in the Torah not to do a tattoo, but he did not know any better. And while gravely mistaken in practice, it was a beautiful and sincere, if not extremely misguided, tribute to his faith and to his Jewish heritage. Suffice it to say, we didn't have enough time to teach him about the appropriate Jewish tattoo etiquette, but we did have time to put on tefillin with him and talk to him and try to put him in touch with the local folks so that he could have more of a Jewish life. But now the question, of course, is what do you do if you have Hashem's name written on you? Now, the truth be told, I overpromised, because our Gemara is talking less about tattoos and more about if a person wrote the name of Hashem. And there is the possibility of washing off Hashem's name. What do you do? How do you do it? But by extension, the question of erasing a tattoo will come up at the end, not in the Gemara, but based on the halachic discussion around the removal of a tattoo that has on it Hashem's name. So let's share the screen. Let's get started. And again, as I mentioned, I have to leave around
the Berditchever would have defended him and said, look how much he loves Hashem.
Yeah. And the Berditch, 100%. It came from the most beautiful and tragically misinformed place. But you know what? It's not his fault that he didn't have an education, but it's our job to try to connect him from then on. And so anyways, I wonder whatever happened with that person. But all righty. So how do we get into this? So as you recall, we were having a discussion that's more connected to Shabbos. It was the question of building a barrier of kalim around the fire, and if one is allowed to have within that barrier kalim vessels that are going to implode, crack when exposed to the extreme heat of fire, thus letting those liquids out and it extinguishing the fire. You're not directly pouring water on the fire. It's garam kiboy. You are just indirectly leading to kiboy, to the fire being extinguished. And so the question is that permissible? Rabbi Yossi says no, and the Chachamim seem to say yes. Now, the issue at hand, or what's going to happen now, is the Gemara is going to say that Rabbi Yossi, who is very uncomfortable with guram, with indirectly causing something, seems to be more comfortable in another scenario of being a gorem, leading indirectly to another prohibited act. And so we're now going to be comparing and contrasting the discussion about placing a jug full of water and having Hashem's name and being exposed to water by bathing. So here we go. Rami d'Rabbanan ad Rabbanan, Rami d'Rabbi Yossi ad Rabbi Yossi. We have a teaching which is contradictory to the Rabbanan, and we have the same teaching, the same brisa is also contradicts the stated opinion of Rabbi Yossi. How does that work? The Tanya, you have a brisa that says, a person has Hashem's name on his flesh. What do? What's the halacha? If you have Hashem's name written on your skin, one may not bathe, nor smear other kinds of ointments or oil. And the person also is prohibited from standing in a place with the kind of shmutz, dirt, refuse, which is prohibited, with which we are prohibited to expose any davar shebekdusha, because of the need to honor Hashem's name. So although one should not be writing Hashem's name on their skin, once it's there, we must treat it with the respect, honor, and the laws of treating Hashem's name. Wow, that's a pretty strong statement and a strong incentive to not write in ink or pen or anything else Hashem's name on your skin. What if a person has to go to the mikvah? And the toiveling here is a mitzvah, because we know the Torah describes a variety of impurities, potential to become tamei for both men and women. Although today there are more women impurities that are part of the active, ongoing Jewish life cycle, but men and women alike have the capacity to become ritually impure in a variety of ways. And if a person has the opportunity to become tahar, to become purified, what do? Can you go to the mikvah? So the Brisa says as follows. What do? You should wrap around the name of Hashem. Gemi. Let's see, Rabbi Steinsaltz translates Gemi. We've had this before. Reed like paper or a wrap of reeds, which I suppose was more malleable and available than other materials. The yored, the toivel, and then the person could go into the mikvah while ostensibly protecting the name of Hashem from being erased. That's the Chachamim. They say you have to protect the name of Hashem. Rabbi Yossi says no. A person is permitted just to go into the mikvah, toivel like usual. Just don't rub the site of the name of Hashem. Let's read Rashi. We put on the reeds. The Gemara's present presumption is, why are you wrapping the gemi? Why are you wrapping anything around the name of Hashem? So that Hashem's name does not become erased with the water. Alma, from here we can infer the Rabbanan gram moichek asur. Rabbi Yossi, the Rabbanan, say even indirectly causing the erasure is prohibited. Rabbi Yossi Shari, whereas Rabbi Yossi is the one who says go into the mikvah. If going into the mikvah is goyrem, it causes the name to be erased, no problem. So here, if you'll notice, the point that Rashi explains that the Gemara is making is that Rabbi Yossi, who's not permissive of even indirectly doing something that's prohibited, here is permissive. And the Chachamim, who in the laws of Shabbos are permissive, they say you can't put a earthenware jug of water that we know is going to crack, even though indirectly the fire might go out. When it comes to the name of Hashem being erased, the Rabbanon are more machmir. And so it appears to be a contradiction. Excuse me.
Actually, the placing of the reed on the written area and then removing it can cause it to come off. Because
that's because we're assuming that the reeds are sticky.
Or pulling it off.
That's because we're assuming they're sticky. It would be like putting a Band-Aid on Hashem's name. You'd end up pulling it off. But if the reed is not sticky,
well, if you just put, it will fall off.
Or you tie it.
You gotta apply it somehow that it will stick to the flesh.
You tie it around, make a little knot.
Ah.
I don't know that for a fact. That's what I have to assume because I went through the same thought process, which is that if it's adhering to the flesh, well, then the removal will be part of the problem. So I don't know if I'm right, but that's how I had to visualize it. It was being tied. Reb Beryl.
Based on this discussion, because I know several Chabadniks, kids who came back who have tattoos. Do we encourage them to remove them or not?
So I just want to clarify one thing, which I had to go through again myself. We're not talking about any type of writing. We're talking specifically about the person that decides to have Hashem's name written.
Right.
So,
no, but Rabbi.
So you're asking two questions. Generally speaking, what is the halachic view on tattoo removal of any sort? But assuming that there is it is permissible to remove a tattoo, which is not 1,000,000% obvious. But assuming that your posek says you can remove the tattoo, a whole nother set of issues arise if the tattoo is Hashem's name, because you're not allowed.
Rabbi, not even Hashem's name. We had letters, the value of Jewish letters, the word shalom. I would bring from what we learned, that those letters themselves present.
Hold on, so tell me something. You have an anecdote of a young man who had the name Shalom on his skin, and he wanted to remove it. And what was he advised?
All of them that I know still have the tattoos and are Chabadnik. So I presume that when they came back, they consulted somebody and said, leave it alone, maybe.
It's not entirely simple that a person could remove a tattoo. It's not entirely simple. There are many. Basically, I looked into it a while ago a little bit. There are poskim that permit it, but there are other poskim that prohibit it. And then there's another question, which I'm not going to answer, but I just want to share the question. There's a question today about micro needling, I think, or micro pigment. Today, people do that for a receding hairline, or women do it for eyebrows, and there's other types of tattoos that are not entirely purely for aesthetic vein purposes. Unfortunately, there are certain procedures, certain procedures that alter the human body, and they're part of the rehabilitation is to create a tattoo to replicate that which was removed. And it's a question which ultimately many posts can permit, but here going back to Hashem's name, it's a double question, Rebera. Person has Hashem's name. Question number one is, can you remove a tattoo, period? And assuming you can remove a tattoo, is there any room to permit the removal of a tattoo? Again, right now, our Gemara is not talking about tattoos. Our Gemara is talking about ink, which might be erased in the water. But you brought it up. I brought it up. So I just want to tell you that I did a little Googling in some of the Jewish halacha journals. And suffice it to say, there are tzadim lekan ulekan. There are viewpoints that permit and many that prohibit. So you're not going to get a uniform answer. Even the question of removing a tattoo, period, if I recall correctly, Rav Moshe Feinstein, Olav Shalom, gives apparently a length, I have to look it up, a lengthy psak prohibiting general tattoo removal. But there are other poskim that prohibit. But when it comes to Hashem's name, it's a whole lot more complicated. And don't do it to begin with. I'll tell you that much. No one here should get Hashem's name on a tattoo.
One more small diversion. Why are we so worried that Rabbi Yossi is not consistent? Why can't he be machber in some cases and not in others?
The word is not worried. We're not so worried. We are mindful that the Chachamim are generally consistent. And this is an exercise to gain clarity in the viewpoint of Rabbi Yossi. The clarity can either be defining the difference, the halachic distinction between the two cases, or the clarity might be that there's two Rabbi Yossis, or the clarity might be there's a you have to amend the text. But the default assumption the Gemara takes is that people, and especially the Chachamim, are going to be consistent. And if there's an inconsistency, that's a space that's worthy of probing, particularly because the probing of the apparent contradiction usually uncovers greater nuance and clarity in the matter at hand. And so it's not that we're perturbed. It's an opportunity. The Gemara is generally not about being perturbed. The Gemara is about taking opportunities to probe and uncover depth, nuance, and distinction. And that's what we're going to do here. And thank you for asking to allow me to, if you disagree, I welcome any disagreeing, but I believe that's generally why the Gemara would probe a distinction, especially because the how do you call it? The compiler, the editor, the redactor of the Talmud knows the answer before they write down the question. And so the purpose is to help us go through this thought process and gain clarity. So again, Rabbanan ad Rabbanan, Rami ad Rabbi Yossi ad Rabbi Yossi in the following brayso. So the Gemara is going to first probe Rabbi Yossi's opinion. Shani Hasam. The Gemara says there's an important distinction. This is not going to stand, but the Gemara initially says there's an important distinction between fire on Shabbos and erasing Hashem's name. You know why? Because the source, the origin of the prohibition of erasing God's name is from the pasuk that concludes V'ibadatem es shemam min hamakom hahu. You shall destroy the names of Avodah Zarah from wherever they are. We're talking about when the Jewish people take the land of Israel. They should absolutely, here, Rabbi Steinsaltz quotes it. You shall break down their altars, smash their pillars, their sacred trees, burn with fire. The graven images of their God shall you hew down. You shall destroy their name from the place. You shall not do so to the Lord your God. So it's describing how the Jewish people should aggressively dismantle and ruin and erase and delete and destroy Avodah Zarah. And then the verse concludes, Lo tasun came l'Hashem Elokechem. These behaviors mustn't be done. They may not be done l'Hashem Elokechem in regards to Hashem your God. And so therefore, we are not allowed to erase, destroy from the temple, etc. Now let's read that word again. Lo ta'asun kain. Do not do so. Asiya is generally a proactive word. Asiya huda asur. You're not allowed to actively dismantle or erase Hashem's name. Grama shari. Because we use very precisely and strategically the word of lo ta'asun, Rabbi Yossi infers that grama alone is permissible. So why does Rabbi Yossi say you can't do grama by Shabbos? Because generally Rabbi Yossi sees grama, indirect causation, to be very close to an action, with the exception of where the Torah throws us a clue that the prohibition is exclusively an active direct asiyah. That's the Gemara's initial reading over here of why Rabbi Yossi may have a different halachic viewpoint by erasing Hashem's name from his regular grama wary perspective when it comes to other areas, for example, putting out fire on Shabbos. That's an interesting distinction. Makes sense, I think. But the Gemara is not going to ultimately allow that to stand because hold on, I don't know just what happened here. Hang on. That was weird. I see what happened. Share the screen. Let's do this again. So the page reloaded. Ihachi. Just thumbs up. You see the screen? Okay, Shkai. Ihachi. You want to draw a distinction between erasing Hashem's name and Shabbos? Not so fast, says the Gemara. Hachenami, I did a fast survey of the verses in the Torah that describe Shabbos. And you know what it says? Ksiv, loy, tase, kol, milacha. You shall not tase. You shall not perform, in the word that we used previously to say directly. Asiyahu the Asr, I could use your same logic in reading the verses that describe Shabbos. It says, Asiyahu the Asr, maybe you're not allowed to proactively and directly do it, but Garama Shari, maybe indirectly you should be allowed to. And so therefore, the Gemara concludes now that Rabbi Yossi is not able to draw a biblical distinction between Shabbos and erasing Hashem's name. And so now the Gemara pivots backwards a little bit to amend its understanding of Rabbi Yossi's prohibition of grama. Why does Rabbi Yossi not allow you to put a jug of water near the fire if it's going to crack? Not because it's biblically prohibited. Biblically, it may be permitted because tasa, it's a rabbinic prohibition. Rabbi Yossi says, I know when a fire breaks out, a person goes into panic. He's looking for those 100-year-old Coca-Cola shares stocks, and he's looking for his flash drive that has his Bitcoin, and he's in a panic. He could see his whole life and all of his savings go up in smoke if he loses the documentation. And maybe he owns a few acres of land in Israel, and if he loses the deed, I don't know, it's lost forever. It's a lot going on. If we're going to allow him to put out the fire indirectly, he's going to end up saying, you know what, I cannot wait. Let's just pour the water on the fire. It's the same thing anyways. And so Rabbi Yossi is mindful of the frame of mind that a person is in during a fire, and thus amends. Not he amends. He was consistent. The Gemara needs to change how we understand Rabbi Yossi to that Rabbi Yossi's prohibition is midrabanan. Now, when it comes to going into the mikveh or taking a bath and the name being erased indirectly, does a person experience the same degree of panic? Not unless it's ice water. And anyways, there's not much you can do. And that's, at this point, that seems to be how we understand why Rabbi Yossi has a different perspective on Shabbos than by erasing a name. So now we almost reverse. Until now, we thought Rabbi Yossi was generally grama averse. And at this point in time, the Gemara seems to conclude, no, actually, Rabbi Yossi is generally not grama averse. There's something unique about Shabbos that causes him to tell a person to be extra mindful and not get into a mode, into a zone of allowing water onto fire, because once you pop, you can't stop. And he's afraid that this will get out of control. That is how we must now understand Rabbi Yossi. The Gemara says, Ihachi, kasha d'Rabbanan ad Rabbanan. Well, now we need to resolve and deal with a Rabbanan versus Rabbanan problem. The Rabbanan are lenient about, by the way, all of this is going to be revisited one more time. So let's not get too entrenched in the present understanding, but I think it's a very interesting thought process. Well, now we're left with a problem of Rabbanan ad Rabbanan, a contradiction between the way the Rabbanan express themselves. Why? We have the fire where the Rabbanan say you are allowed to indirectly cause fire, and we have the Rabbanan by tattoos who say you absolutely must protect it. It can't be indirectly damaged. If you're allowing a person to do grama even when they're in a panic, hasam like kol shekain, surely we should be comfortable when there is no panic. Hold on, I'm just loading Toysus here for a moment. All right. Singwara says, Vitezbra. So now we need to revisit and understand the whole name of Hashem story a little differently. Again, what was the discussion about going into the mikvah? If you're allowed to tie some gemi, which, doctor, I realized the reason why you and I were initially confused is in modern Ivrit, gemi is not reed. It's something of more of a gummy nature, right?
No,
a rubber band.
That would be good. That's gummy, actually.
Actually, when you look at the way it's written, I agree with what you said, because it says korech gemi. He wraps it around.
Right.
He doesn't really apply it and it sticks it to it.
Right,
So
right.
in the wording itself, it implies wrapping.
Right. Okay. Shkaya. So the Gemara says, "V'tezra, hi gemi hechedami." What exactly are we doing with this reed? What is its function? Rashi, the hacha gemi disirchu rabbanon mishum shelo yimachik. Let's figure out why and how it works that the rabbanon want this gemi to avoid erasing Hashem's name, which is your assertion, your assumption. If it's tightly bound, if it's tightly affixed. Now you have a chatzitza. I know we're introducing a lot of new ideas in one Gemara. What is a chatzitza? A chatzitza is a barrier between the person's person and the water. And when going to the mikvah, especially a tvilas mitzvah, it is essential that there not be anything interrupting between a person and the water. Dr. Stamler, as a dentist in a frum community, is aware of the fact that there are shailot that arise from something like a temporary filling. Or I think you've mentioned that you've dealt with such Rabbanim asking you about that, right?
No, actually, not Rabbanim specifically, but with patients.
Patients.
Who came to me and wanted to remove a temporary crown and then reapply it.
Interesting.
Rabbi, we also had it with the jewelry, with the clothes of it.
Yeah.
We all had
there's a problem, or there's an issue with the water needing to have access to the person's entire body.
But the truth is, if it's a temporary measure, then I don't think it's considered chatzitza.
It's complicated. Basically, halacha is more worried about something that is temporary than something that is permanent. So, for example, a permanent filling is for sure not a problem. But because it's temporary, it's not really part of the person's person. And anyways, not to get into it, but that's that same thing why the halacha might be concerned about stitches or a bandage. Or, I mean, there are ways to, it's much more complicated than that. But just if we had to give a general rule, generally halacha is concerned, Jewish law is concerned that when a person needs to go into the mikvah needs to have access to the person's entire body. And if the gemi is on tight, it will be a chatzitza. It blocks the water from having access to the hand.
Our doctor's fillings would be absolutely waterproof. I have no doubt.
Yeah. And if it's not on tight, well, it's totally not going to protect the name of Hashem from being erased. So something is amiss. Rashi, how is the gemi protecting? If it's tight, so the Gemara basically is slowly cracking away at the assertion that this gemi is to protect Hashem's name. So the Gemara says, okay, hold on, let's think about this. Chatzitza, you already should have a chatzitza, mishum diyai. The ink itself is probably a chatzitza. So you've got a bigger problem than the gemi. So the Gemara says, no, we're talking about balacha. The ink is somewhat wet still. Blood, ink, honey, milk, yuvation when they are dried and caked. It could be a chatzitza. Lachin, if they're still moist, ein chaytzitza. So maybe you have a way to work around the name of Hashem being a chatzitza. Now we're trying to imagine this scenario where a person is about to go into the mikvah and someone scribbles Hashem's name on them. How did that happen? Why did that happen? But let's put that aside for a moment. Assuming the ink is somehow moist, Mikomak and Kasha, we still have a problem. What is the function? What is the role of this gemi? And so the Gemara now totally revises the whole nature of the purpose of the gemi, and thus reframes the whole apparent contradiction between the two texts. And again, I did warn you, this is probably more the style of Gemara that we're used to. A little bit of a mental ping pong trying to work through these different texts. This is the real reason why the Rabbanan want a person to have gemi over the Hashem's name. Because this is what they're thinking. Asur lamoid bifnei Hashem arum. A person is prohibited from standing with their naked, exposed body in the presence of Hashem's name. Now, that's very difficult. If you are a person that has Hashem's name on your body, you're going to have a very difficult time keeping it from ever being exposed to Hashem's name. Are you assuming that Rabbi Yossi is absolutely cool with a naked body being exposed to Hashem's name, where in truth, that's not okay in Jewish law? So the answer is no. Rabbi Yossi will say simple, you go to the mikveh, put your hand, again, I keep on assuming it's on the arm for some reason, but wherever it is, put your hand, cover it up. And now your hand could serve for this purpose as a mechitza, a separation between Hashem's name and the naked body. Now, there is a question that comes up. I haven't researched it, but I'm sure it's discussed, which is we don't usually say that the human body can serve as to block itself. So there's probably a discussion of why here we are okay, at least Rabbi Yossi, at least the Gemara is okay with using the hand itself to cover up another part of the body. I suppose the answer is because you're not covering up the body, you're covering up the words that are added onto the body. Rashi is kind to us here. So since when can't the naked body be exposed to Hashem's name? So he says, in Deuteronomy, it says it should not be seen to you, ervas davar, a matter of nakedness. Although usually the word erva is a description of prohibited relations, this pasuk in this context is understood by Chazal to teach us a prohibition of having exposed body to Hashem's name. So the Rabbanan Nami Domanach Yadalave. Well, if putting a hand is okay, why don't the Rabbanan allow this? So my answers: humans are human. Zimnin demishle v'shakele. Sometimes you move your hand. I'm thinking back to you go into the mikveh and it's 37 degrees. It's freezing and your body, you have some kind of shot and you instinctively move your hand. So now what do you do? So Rabbi Yossi Nami, Zimnin, Dimishtali, Vishakele. Rabbi Yossi also is talking to humans who could very reasonably forget and move the hand. Rabbi Yossi would agree that if you have readily available gemi, you should certainly block off Hashem's name before going into the mikvah. Really, the debate is when you don't have gemi. Do you have to run out to the store and buy it? Do you have to go knock on all your neighbors' doors? Rabbanan Savri, Tefillah Bizman Alav Mitzvah Umadrina. The rabbis say, you got Hashem's name, you can't cover it, you're going to do whatever it takes to find it. And if the time of going to the mikvah is pushed off, Zol Zain. No. Rabbi Yossi says no. Tefillah Bizman Mitzvah V'Loi Madrina. Rabbi Yossi says, person is ready to go into the mikveh to come pure, you have to do it then. The mitzvah is to do it now. So to delay, to search for your gemi, when you can reasonably cover with your hand and hopefully not forget, well then Rabbi Yossi prioritizes the mitzvah of going to the mikveh. Let's read Rashi. Lav mitzvah. V'iloi mishkach gemi ha'idna l'shtoy adamachar. If you cannot find the gemi tonight or today, you'll wait till tomorrow. L'man da'amar lav mitzvah. Basically, without getting too into the weeds over here, in a number of areas of tahara, purity, you go to the mikveh in the daytime, but one has to wait until sunset to be allowed to partake of matters of kachim or holy items. For example, truma. If you remember the very, very beginning of Maseches Brachos, a kohen who becomes ritually impure goes to mikveh in the daytime, and only at nighttime can they resume being 100% tahar. And so basically in the world of impurity, there's 3 steps. A person becomes ritually impure. They're totally ritually impure. A person goes to the mikveh at the allotted time. They become partially pure, but they still need to wait for nightfall. The Torah describes how a person should go to mikveh before sunset, and then the sun will set. We could either read that to be a mitzvah, you should go then, or the Rabbanan say, no, not that you should go then. The Torah is just telling you how it works. If you want to be pure right away, go to the mikveh in the daytime hours and then let the sun set. So let's just let's just recap where we're holding until now. Two texts. The discussion of Shabbos and the exploding pitchers of water. Rabbi Yossi says, don't do that. Rabbanan say, do that. We have our story of going to the mikvah while having Hashem's name written on your skin. There, Rabbi Yossi says, no need to wrap it up. And the Chachamim say, you need to wrap it up. The Gemara for the whole first many lines assumed the wrapping up was to protect Hashem's name from being erased, leading to some trouble. Particularly, what help is that gemi? And second of all, well, that was the main issue. So the Gemara tried to give a rationale why Rabbi Yossi would want you to have it and the Rabbanan wouldn't need you to have it. But why the Rabbanan would want you to have it and Rabbi Yossi would not. Rabbi Yossi says it's grandma, but ultimately the Gemara scratches that whole thing and says, no, we're not talking about erasing Hashem's name. We're talking about the exposing Hashem's name to the naked flesh, which is not ideal. It shouldn't be done. It's prohibited. Another reason why you shouldn't get a tattoo or write Hashem's name on yourself. It's going to be hard to then observe all the laws of honoring Hashem's name. Rabbi Yossi also says, ideally, you should cover it up in a case where you're in a race against the clock and the mikveh is going to close or the time is going to close and you can't find it. Well, put your hand over Hashem's name and try to be mindful. The Gemara asks one last question. This really concludes the bulk of the discussion. So, Reb Beryl, what initially seemed to be a contradiction between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbanan turns out not to be a contradiction at all, because on Shabbos we're talking about grama or germ, and by mikvah, we're in the name of Hashem, we're talking about if it's a mitzvah to go to the mikvah right away or you can wait. Different discussion. Nothing to do about being gorim. Nothing to do about erasing directly or indirectly Hashem's name. The Gemara asks a question, which again is side, but let's. So Rabbi Yossi tefillah b'zman mitzvah. Is Rabbi Yossi of the belief that going to the mikvah on time is a mitzvah? Vatanya hazav, azava, v'amitzor, v'amitzoras, etc., etc. Tefillah sabayoyim. Need to be allowed to tefillah sabayoyim. I'm going to do this fast because I got to go in 1 minute. Rabbi Yossi, I remember Rabbi Yossi says there's no rush to go to the mikvah. So Gemara answers this. Rabbi Yossi, who says there's no rush, is not the same person. Hahi. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. This is a different Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Yehuda. Who says all you need to do is as long as you eventually go to the mikvah. So we have two Rabbi Yossis. We have the Rabbi Yossi Bar Chalafta, who's the Rabbi Yossi of our Mishnah. He says you got to go to mikvah right when you're allowed, and that is unlike the viewpoint of Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. My dear friends, I'm sorry to cut this a little short. I hope you found today's Gemara a little interesting. What I owe you, and Bli Neder will start off on Monday, is I want to go through I want to revisit one last time the halachas of erasing Hashem's name, Lemaisa, and we'll ask and review the question of a tattoo. So I want to review some of the issues once again. My dear friends, have a wonderful Shabbos. Hope to see everybody on Monday. Shkoyach. Have a blessed day and a good Shabbos.
Good job.